Hello and welcome to Integrated Process Psychotherapy, a human way of understanding what we do as therapists. In this video, I invite you to look beneath the surface and explore the complicated world of therapy. I will introduce complexity theory. It's an overarching perspective that is relevant to all therapists, regardless of our approach or techniques. This perspective is particularly useful for those therapists who are at the beginning stages of their career. Real therapy is messy, complex, unpredictable, and demanding, and yet it can be incredibly satisfying for us as therapists. We don't always know what to do or what is going to happen because things change moment to moment, and we have to make decisions and choices of how to respond to our client and what we might do that could be helpful. Often, because of this uncertainty, we look for some sort of method or school which kind of gives us a little bit of structure or a way of grasping what is going on. But these limit our options and they can narrow our mindsets. I'm sure you've had this experience. You plan something for the therapy. You want to do something in a particular session, and you impose on the session something that you think would be helpful, but it doesn't work. And the client resists or actually wants to do something different. Often this is because the client has experienced some unexpected life event, or they've had some sort of traumatic memory that's appeared in a dream, or just that they're not quite ready to talk about the things you want them to talk about. However, given trust and space, clients will tend to bring all sorts of experiences, from the most bizarre to the most transcendent. I've had extraordinary clients. I've had clients who have psychotic episodes and therefore have delusions or hallucinations. One believed he'd been an assassin for President Clinton. I've had people bring their past lives. I've worked with people who seem to have experienced alien abductions or moments of transcendent illuminations. Certainly, I come across synchronicities and kind of psychic phenomena very often. These are all parts of our human experience, whether we understand them or not. So, a session for a therapist can be stressful, it can be troubling, it can be demanding, but it should never be boring. I've been working as a therapist for over 40 years, and I'm still very interested and excited by what each client brings. Because human beings are fascinating, and therapy is always somewhat of a mysterious journey. I'm always honored in some sense that my clients invite me into their inner world. So, given this unpredictability and complexity, how can we expect to understand and practice good psychotherapy using simplistic and limiting models of human beings and one-sided methods and techniques of psychotherapy? If we look at the current state of psychotherapy in the Western world, it's a mess. There's a hodgepodge of theories, practices, techniques, approaches. Each one is proclaiming to be the answer. It's the best thing. Each one is competing for the therapy training dollars or euros. Each one has got its own factions, and they do not properly communicate with each other. So this is a diagram of some of just of the very few kinds of therapy. Now, CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, seems to be winning the race for minds and dollars based on a quite limited model of human beings and what therapy is meant to do. It's very effective for specific problems and particular kinds of clients, but it's certainly not for everyone. It looks at the relationship between thinking, feeling, and behavior and how they coordinate and how they influence each other. and it claims to be evidence-based, quick and efficient. And of course, part of that is it lowers the cost for insurance companies and those who have to pay for therapy. It's quite inviting, but when we think of evidence-based psychotherapy, it really depends on what we mean by evidence. And often, who funds the studies? Real evidence is clinical experience of what works for each therapist over time. And it takes a number of years for us to understand and to gather these kind of evidences. The other important school of psychotherapy is psychoanalysis. It's about 100 years old at the moment. While some of its formulations are extremely helpful and insightful, its techniques have not really evolved very much over that 100 years. They're still based on Freud's ideas, based on transference and interpretation. And it's not actually updated the nature of the unconscious based on therapeutic experience and on the studies of how human beings think or understand. There are many, many new techniques and approaches coming out almost daily. Some are very effective. I use EMDR, which I consider extremely useful. There are a number of mindful-based therapies. These use ideas gathered from Buddhism, but all of these tend to add to the confusion for us therapists. What approach should we learn? What's useful for us? What technique should I use in this particular situation? So my question is, how can we create a coherent way of making therapeutic decisions that are in the service of the client and that are not prejudged by us as therapists? So I'm going to use a kind of poor analogy for psychotherapy. A client will go to a therapist expecting some sort of help, not always knowing exactly what that is or what's wrong. So that's kind of similar to if you have something go wrong with your car and you don't know what it is, so you take it to a mechanic. You want that mechanic to have a broad experience of cars and engines and all sorts of aspects, because you don't know exactly what's happening that makes your car not work. So you want them to understand how cars are built. You want them to be able to tell you what's wrong with the car. You want them to have the right tools and equipment, and you want them to know what should be done for it to be put right. If your mechanic only knows about brakes or tires, they will want to sell you brakes or tires. And that may be helpful, but it's definitely not the whole picture and certainly may not cure or help what's wrong with your car. So in the same way, all therapy approaches and methods have something to offer, but different approaches are appropriate for different people and different problems at different times. No one set of clothes fits all, and there are no magic bullets. I think of therapists in 100 years, and they'll look back on what we're doing now, and they will view our methods as extremely primitive and even ignorant. Just in the same way, when we look back on doctors 200 years in the past, and they're using leeches, and they're using bloodletting to cure diseases, we know that those are not effective. In the same way, we have to recognize our limitations and ignorance as therapists. Psychotherapy has to embrace all aspects of human experience and behavior. If it fails to understand and include anything that a human being can feel or think or imagine, it falls short of being fully human. I've trained in, or at least investigated, many, many kinds of therapy, and there are always new ones coming. Integrative process psychotherapy is not another new therapy. It's a way to integrate and understand what we already know and what we are already doing. It opens a door to new insights and understanding without discounting what we already know. we are often in danger of forgetting that every client has the same depth and complexity of experience as we do. Do we treat clients as if their problems are simpler and one-dimensional, while ours are not? Do we actually approach them as we would want to be approached? So we have to look for an approach that is integrative rather than exclusive, not simply eclectic or a jumble of techniques, but with an overarching perspective and theoretical background that helps us understand what we are actually doing and what it is that clients are actually bringing to us. So I start with a fundamental assumption that human beings are inherently complex. Our models and methods need to encompass and reflect that complexity, a certain amount of unpredictability, and the creativity and the flow that happens within a therapeutic session. In this series of discussions of integrated process psychotherapy, I'll introduce ideas derived from what's called complexity theory. This is an overarching and expansive approach to understanding human beings. It helps us begin to really grasp what we are doing now and how we can become more inclusive and more effective in our approach to clients. So here's a diagram of complexity theory which shows the influences that it has from systems thinking, chaos theory, and process philosophy. I'm going to use some of the ideas, as you could see, just a few of the ideas which come from those approaches to look at panic attacks. We know panic attacks. We know the sense in which the person gets overcome with fear and they panic and their body basically goes out of control. We know they're very, very debilitating and very difficult for our clients. So how can some of these ideas help us understand them better? So let's look at systems thinking to start with. I've just put a couple of concepts in here, but there are many, many more. The fundamental idea about systems thinking is that the whole, whatever it is more complex and it's different in quality from the sum of the parts. We can apply that to our body. We know that our body has different organs which relate to each other in particular ways, but the body functions as a whole, independent and different from those parts, those organs. We know that within those organs there's cells, and each cell has its function, and it works together with the other cells, but the whole organ is different than those cells and the function of those cells. So when we look at a panic attack, we know that that's a whole person experience. It has physical aspects, emotional aspects, and cognitive aspects. So those are the parts of the experience. It arises at a particular time and has very deep roots in the past. When we look at it, we have to think of it as a whole, which is not just those parts. And we can't understand it by taking apart the parts. Oh, this is the physical part, this is the emotional part, this is the thinking part, because it's a whole experience. Let's look at feedback loops. We all know about feedback loops. Once a panic gets a grip, there's a kind of self-reinforcing or what's called a positive feedback loop. The physical symptoms of breathlessness, dizziness, feeling some tingling in your body reinforce the fear that started those symptoms. But the fear then escalates the physical symptoms. A person tends to hyperventilate as they get more and more frightened. And of course, that makes them more dizzy and there's more tingling in their body. And then there's fear that something bad is going to happen to them. Maybe they're going to die. And that escalates and escalates and escalates until it dissipates. So let's look at chaos theory and one of its main important concepts, which is attractors. Attractors are actually complex mathematical models, but we can think of them as sets of states to which a system tends to evolve. It actually predicts patterns, how things are patterned, like our body, or like the weather, or like anything, a tree. There's a patterning in the universe. It's as though they're attracted towards a particular pattern, a particular way of organization. And that's regardless of what happens around them. So our bodies tend to look human because that's the pattern of humanness. But every body is also different from every other body. So you can think of panic attacks tend to follow a similar pattern, not just for an individual, but across different clients. Often the trigger is unknown, but we do know there's a fear response, hyperventilation, which causes dizziness, sometimes tingling. It typically peaks within minutes and then dissipates slowly, very slowly, often with some individuals, leaving the person very tired, very anxious about experiencing another attack. So you could say there's an attractor for panic attacks, as there is an attractor for depression, or an attractor for other things like OCD. While the attractor gives us the pattern, the overall pattern of something, there is an unpredictability about every aspect in the universe. That's the chaotic part. So while each panic attack has a similar pattern, it's unpredictable when and how it will arise. It's unpredictable on exactly what the experience will be like. It's unpredictable about when it will end. And in fact, that's part of the fear in a panic attack, is the sense that you don't know when it's going to finish. So now let's look at process philosophy. Process refers to the changing aspect of the universe and our experience of it. So not only is the universe changing, but our experience is changing moment to moment. Everything is changing. There is nothing that is static for any amount of time. Some things last for longer and some things last shorter. So a thought may be very quick, and then you could say, well, a tree is very long. It's a long process. Panics, like every process, has a beginning, a kind of trigger, whatever sets it off, a time where it continues, and then an end. It usually actually has a fairly short period of time that the panic occurs. So beginning, middle, end. That's a process. Just like a star is a process. It has a beginning, it has a middle, and an end, but it goes on far, far longer than anything we can imagine. And for us, a thought has a beginning, it continues for a while, and then it ends. So process is describing that changing aspect of the universe, of our experience, and of everything that's going on around us. Process also tells us that everything is connected. All aspects of our experience are connected to all others in some ways, some stronger, some not so strong. We have a person's experience of themselves and what's happening around them. In the panic attack, it's a very personal and very overwhelming physiological, psychological process. But it's not just that, because it's not simply a personal experience. It's also a social phenomena in that the panic will affect other people around, particularly if they see it or know about it. It's a cultural process, and it's also a medical phenomena. There's drugs to help with panic attack. So this is just a simple example of how complexity ideas can articulate and elaborate our view of human experience. I'll continue to explore certain concepts, in particular relationship, pattern, and process, in the following videos, in order to develop a far more overarching, coherent approach to psychotherapy. Now, as therapists, we often give clients homework. We know that our clients won't always do it. We know that it might set up resistance. We know the person may not have time or interest even in that homework. But we still do it because it's important that we give something to our clients that they can hold on to and that they can practice in between the sessions. So I'd like to give you some homework. First of all, I want you to ask yourself, how do I limit myself as a therapist? Now, this can be a surface question, or it can be a more profound question where you spend some time looking deeper inside yourself, wondering, where are my blind spots? And another question I suggest is, what do I need to learn so I can feel more satisfied? We know there's a great distinction, a difference between a satisfying session and one that's unsatisfying. We know that sometimes we come out of a session feeling uplifted, energized. Other times we come out feeling exhausted and drained. Now, in order to expand your understanding of some of these ideas, I'd like you to check out the resource page on my website, roland-evans.com. The URL is below. I do suggest you read the extracts, at least, from The Tao of Complexity by Jean Bolton. And also you might check out Seeking Wholeness. That's the book that I wrote many years ago.